Hi, I'm Mindie Burgoyne, and this is Fridays in the Graveyard. I love a graveyard, don't you? We're in Denton Cemetery today, Denton, Maryland, in Caroline County, and the grave that we're going to talk about is this one right here over my shoulder, the grave of Marshall Price. Marshall Price was a 23-year-old man, a blacksmith, a local guy in the community, had a wife, mother, family in the area, and in July of 1895, Marshall Price murdered a young girl in his community named Sallie Dean. Sallie was 14. And we know what he did because he told us. He told us in some commentary he gave when he was in jail in Baltimore. And what he said was, he said, "Gentlemen, you are looking at the hand that killed Sallie Dean," and he held up his hand. He said that Sallie was walking to school as she often did. She usually walked with somebody, but on this particular day, she was by herself. And he approached her. He started talking to her about nothing important, and then he said, for some reason unknown to me, I just took my axe that I was carrying and hit her upside the head. And she started to hold her head, and she was dazed, and I quickly dragged her into the woods, and I started to tear her clothing. But she started to cry out, and somebody was coming by, so I didn't want them to hear, and I took out my knife, and I cut her throat, and I buried her in a shallow grave. So this is what he tells people. He was brought back from that, he was in Baltimore when he gave that confession. He was brought back here to Denton. And as you can imagine, in a small agricultural community where everybody knows everybody, people were pretty enraged about Marshall Price and his crime, especially now that he had admitted to it. And so they did what you probably would expect. They dragged him out of the jail. Some vigilantes got together. They beat him nearly senseless and hung him from a tree out behind the courthouse. Now, they didn't stop there, because Marshall Price was shamed in death as well, because if you look at his grave here, you can see that it's standing differently than all the other graves. All these graves are facing north and south, except Marshall Price's, which is facing east and west. And that's because when Marshall Price was buried here, it was way out on the outskirts of the cemetery. The old part of the cemetery is back there. That's where there were graves. And then way out here on the end is old Marshall Price in the opposite direction. That's so that when he rises on Judgment Day, he will be with his back to his maker, right? So the men that killed Marshall Price, all of them came to a horrible death within 5 years, they say. One burned to death, one was drowned, one was struck by lightning. The tree that he was hanged from died within a year. They say that there was a tree right here by this grave, and it was gone within a year, had died. There's something about this grave that might be haunted. They say that Marshall Price, when the moon is full, will come back to this grave, and right between his headstone and his footstone, he dances. And if you sit in the shadows and look over at the grave, you can see him dancing under the moon, by the light of the moon. Now, I have talked to some old Denton people that grew up here, and they say that, they did come out here and wait and see if Marshall Price would dance on his grave, but he never showed up. But they had been drinking a lot of beer. And why is Marshall Price dancing? Well, some people think it's because he's laughing at the men who killed him, because they came to the same awful end that he came to. But this grave does have a little bit of a mystery about it, because when I first came to see this grave, it was because I was including it in a book that I was writing, and I needed a picture. And I didn't know where it was, but I figured how hard could it be to find a grave in an old cemetery that is facing the wrong way? I mean, look at it. How hard is that to pick out? I must have walked by it 5 or 6 times and I never saw it. So I came back and I got the tourism director to come help me look, and we looked and we couldn't find it. She called the funeral director. He finally guided us to it, and we walked there and saw it, but we had been by it several times and never seen it. And here's the thing, I took out my 35mm DSLR camera and I took some pictures of it real close. I brushed it all off, got some great shots of it. When I got home and I uploaded the pictures to my computer, I noticed that all of the pictures before the Marshall Price pictures and the pictures after, there were 2, were fine. But all of the pictures I took of that grave were black. The entire thing just black. So I had to come back out again and take pictures, but it's a little bit of a mysterious place. So this is Fridays in the Graveyard. The Marshall Price grave is on our Trail of Sorrows bus tour if you're interested in coming out and seeing it. Check us out on ChesapeakeGhost.com. See you next Friday.